I'd like to welcome up Stephanie Mott to our stage. She has done a lot to help out in life. She has a great website that'll be in the newsletter, Transgender Faith Tour. She's been all over. She's helped out a lot of people, and she's continuing to do good work, and I think you're going to like hearing her story.
First thing I want to do is just say thank you for inviting me to be here. Let me be a part of your Sunday morning, and thank you for coming out and letting me be a part of your Sunday morning. I'm going to tell a little bit of my story and share a little bit about what it means to be transgender, and especially the transgender journey of faith, which has been very, very important to me. I'll start off with a little thing. There's a little boy baby and a little girl baby in the hospital in the nursery. And the little boy baby says to the little girl baby, "I'm a boy." The little girl baby says to the boy baby, "Yeah, no, you're not. How do you know that?" The little boy baby lifts up his blanket, looks down, puts his blanket back down and says, "Oh, I'm a boy, all right." The little girl baby says, "No, I don't know. I can't tell. How do you know that you're a boy?" The little boy baby lifts up his blanket and looks down, puts his blanket back down and says, "I'm a boy." The little girl baby is like, "Show me, let me see. How do you know that you're a boy?" So the little boy baby lifts up his blanket really high and says, "Look, blue booties." And that's what they did. They put blue booties on me because that's what they thought. They just decided based on what they could see and not based on what they couldn't see, and there wasn't any way for them to see it at the time, that they put blue booties on me. My mom and dad hung a blue balloon at the mailbox at the end of the driveway, and I was assigned male. I'm going to say I was assigned male. I'm going to say I was not born male. And that's one of the things I think is probably pretty important. And I know every person who's transgender has a different journey, but for me, they looked at what they could look at. There was no way for them to know what was on the inside, and they said, "That's a boy." But I've never been. I don't believe I've ever been male. I believe I've always been female. And they didn't try to do anything bad. That's what they thought, and so that's what they assigned to me. You know, the very first thing I remember knowing about myself was on the inside, I was like my sisters. And on the outside, I was like my brothers. And what I mean by that, has anybody ever seen Brady Bunch on television? Maybe some yeses. But I was Jan. I was not Marcia. But I was Jan. And when I say that, I mean that I don't mean that I looked at the TV and I went, "Oh, that's me." What I mean is I looked at the TV and I saw Jan and I'm like, "Oh, she sees the world the same way I do. She relates to the world the same way I do. She responds to the world the same way I would like to." And that's what I mean when I say that on the inside I was like my sisters. I think you know what I mean when I say on the outside I was like my brothers, so I won't go into that. Same time, about 5 years old that I knew that, I also knew therefore that meant that there was something dreadfully, drastically wrong with me. That this was this horrible thing, that it was totally wrong for me to identify as female, that I couldn't talk about it to anybody, and that if I was going to express myself as the girl of my soul, I would have to sneak off to some place in the little farm where I grew up. And I would express myself authentically as a little girl, and then I would come back around my family and I would do what I affectionately call put on my Steven suit. Because that's what it was. It was a costume that I put on. In order to navigate society, I figured out that the only way that I could do that would be to pretend to be this little boy that they were telling me that I needed to be. You know, I was very fortunate. I was born in Lawrence, Kansas, and I was raised on a little farm outside of Eudora, Kansas. It's just a few miles east of Lawrence, I had a younger sister and a younger brother, and an older sister and an older brother, and my mom. The basis for anything I know about unconditional love, my dad was a typical dad for the 1960s, and he was a product of the Depression, and he'd struggled a lot of his life, and didn't show a lot of emotion, but he was a good man and a great provider. It was the most beautiful place you could ever hope to grow up, I think, except that all this time I'm thinking to myself that I'm not who I'm supposed to be, or I can't be who I'm supposed to be. I don't know how to be who I'm supposed to be, and there's something dreadfully, drastically wrong with me. So the summer after my 9th birthday, I sat 2.5 weeks in that summer in the stairwell of my parents' home, and I went through every page of every single volume of the Encyclopedia Britannica, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Because I'm like, if I can figure out what's wrong with me, I can fix it. And if I could just figure that out, and of course the Encyclopedia Britannica didn't have anything really to say about it. I wouldn't have probably known it if I'd have stumbled across something. My parents were kind of curious about why I spent 2.5 weeks in the stairwell of our home reading the encyclopedia. I think they thought I was smart or something, but I don't know. A few years later, about 4.5, 5 years later, my body started changing in ways that I didn't want it to, and not changing in ways that I did want it to. And the lines between boys and girls became far more distinct and far more separate, both biologically and socially, and I was not where I needed to be okay. And I can tell you that's the exact time in my life that I started thinking about suicide on a daily basis. It was never an answer for me, but I thought about it every day. And there are a lot of dynamics as to why it was never an answer for me. But the reality is that I didn't want to die. I just couldn't imagine a world where I would be able to live and be who I am. And I thought that at that time that this was going to be a lifelong sentence, and I would have to live with this forever. And so life didn't seem very appealing, and life and death seemed like the alternative. But I thought about it every single day. Then a couple years later, a transgender woman named Renee Richards tried to get into the United States Open tennis tournament, and they wouldn't let her play, and invented some kind of a rule about, well, you have to have been born female, and actually she was born female in the same way that I was born female, but they wouldn't let her play, and the news of that made its way all the way to the little farm where I grew up. And for the first time in my life, I knew that it was possible for someone who had been assigned male at birth to be able to live authentically as female. But I didn't think it was possible for me. I thought, if you have money, if you have fame, if you have connections, you can do this thing. But the little farm child from Eudora, Kansas, there's no way. A couple years later, I graduated from Eudora High School and went on to the University of Kansas in the School of Math, and the math department at first, and then in the School of Business. And I was expected to go to KU from the minute that I was born. And at the same time, my dad was telling my sisters that they didn't need to take math because they were just going to grow up to be housewives. And that's part of the framework, the background that I grew up in. But I went to the University of Kansas, and I started going to school, and I had a little more freedom, and I thought, I can actually, I had a car, I could build a wardrobe, and then after a while I'd get so disgusted with myself that I would throw it all away. But then I would start building another female wardrobe again, and I could express myself some. And I was also coming to the conclusion that the people who loved me and the people who I loved thought that people like me, and they didn't know they were talking about me because I'd hidden myself from them, but they thought that people like me were an abomination before God. Not too long after that, I discovered something at the University of Kansas. I guess it happens in other places, I'm not sure, but I found alcohol. And alcohol took away the pain. It took away the fear. It took away the hurt. It even took away the reality. It created a different reality. It wasn't a good reality, but it took it away. And I didn't have to live in that. So the long story short is that for the next 30 years, I abusively used alcohol and other drugs to hide from my reality. By 2005, I had become homeless. I wasn't living in Kansas at the time, so I sent a message, called up my sisters, and both of whom still live in Lawrence, and I asked if they would send me some money to get back to go to Kansas and put me up for a little while. And this time they said no, they weren't going to do that. Must have been a very hard thing for them to say to me, but they were tired of watching me kill myself with the alcohol, and they didn't want me around their teenage kids. And it was actually the most blessed thing that could have happened to me, because I finally got to that place I needed to get to, where I was finished trying to live as a man. And I started trying to figure out what do I need to do in order to be able to live as a woman, to live authentically. As a woman, I was 47 years old. There was no way. I mean, I had tried for 47 years to fit in this box that I didn't belong in. So I finally decided I'd do what I needed to do. And I did. I started at the Topeka Rescue Mission in the men's side. And it was a very uncomfortable place to be, but I did get to go to some chapel meetings and found, somebody asked me if I wanted to step up, stand up and accept Jesus as my Savior. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll try that. Because I was trying to find something that would work for me, and nothing was working. I hadn't had a relationship with God in a long time. I got into a drug and alcohol program and spent 22 days there. And then I got into a men's reintegration facility, which is like a halfway house with on-site counselors. And I had a counselor there who did the one thing I needed that had never happened for me in my life, or at least I didn't believe it was happening or could happen. And he created a space for me. He created a space for me where I could talk to him about what I needed to talk about and not feel judged. And not feel like that I was some kind of a freak or not, or what. And he created a space for me, and I began to grow. I got to invited to a little church not long after that, and the woman who invited me there said there are transgender people in this church. And I'm like, get out of here. There's no transgender people in churches. You got to be kidding me. And she said there's a support group there. And I'm like, no, there's not. There's no support group in a church in Kansas. You're just, I was worried about her for a little bit there. But I knew that there wasn't any support group because I am Google capable. And I've been all over the internet, and I couldn't find anything about transgender support groups in Kansas. And I know now, but I didn't know then, that was because all the transgender support groups were underground. They were clandestine, because if anybody knew where the transgender people met, transgender people wouldn't go because they'd be afraid of the violence. That violence is very real. Those were not unfounded fears. Today in America, once a month, a transgender person is murdered because of who we are. And in the world, it happens about every other day. In the last 3 years, those statistics are pretty much doubled. So it's about 2 people a month in the United States that are being murdered basically for being transgender. And in the world, it happens about every day that somebody is murdered for that. So those fears were founded. And she invited me to this little church, and she said, come, there's transgender people. And I was like, oh, whatever. But I had to go see. And so I went, and I met this woman, and she was transgender, and I could talk to her, and I could touch her. And she was right there in front of me. And you remember when I heard about Renee Richards, I thought, well, yeah, if you have money, if you have fame, if you have connections, you can do this thing. But for the little farm child from Eudora, Kansas, it's not possible. But in that moment, when I met this person in a space that was safe, I believed for the first time in my life that it was possible for me to live authentically as a woman who I am, who I've always been. I kept going to that church, and they brought me in, and they didn't make me sit in the transgender section. They let me. Because what I needed was a place. I needed a place to be, but I needed more than that. I needed a place to belong. And they created that space for me. And in that space, I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie Fried Green Tomatoes. There's a scene in there where Evelyn Couch is trying to, and if you haven't seen it, I think you can follow this. There's a scene where Evelyn Couch is trying to convince her husband, Ed, to let Miss Threadgood come and live with them because Miss Threadgood has changed her life and helped her peel away the layers of Southern womanhood that she had applied to herself all of her life because she thought that's what she had to do. So Ed is like talking, it's not going to happen. She's like, well, this is going to happen. He's like, what has changed? And she says, well, the air and the light. And the movie just goes on and doesn't stop there. I think we should stop and lights should shine down. Because what it meant, and I didn't know it first few times I saw this, but what it means, the air means every breath I take. And the light means everything I see. And that's what changed for me in that church on that day, is every breath I will ever take, everything I will ever see. And my world has changed so much since then. And I think this may be the one thing that we don't talk enough about when it comes to about being transgender. So I went from someone who couldn't stay sober, who couldn't keep a job, who couldn't be a part of society, was a burden on society, to somebody who, well, in November, if I behave myself for a few more months, I'll have 12 years of sobriety. And I dropped out of college at KU back in 1980. I'm not sure about the professors there, but for some reason they didn't want me coming to class and not be sober. I'm kind of like, I'm here. So I quit coming. They didn't like that either. So anyway, I dropped out of KU in 1980, and then after I've been sober for a few years, in 2009, I went back to school. In 2010, I got my associate's degree in human services management. 2014, I got my bachelor of social work degree. 2016, I got my master's degree in social work. And today I'm working as a psychotherapist at the mental health center in Topeka. I'm on the chief of police's advisory board. That's just weird. And I've been on the Human Relations Commission. I've helped start Topeka Pride. We just opened an LGBT center in Topeka, Kansas, across the street from Westboro Baptist Church. So when you all do what you do, and I know you do it because I see it, because I saw it the minute I walked in the door. And I saw the unconditional love, and I saw that inclusion means everybody, not inclusion of some people. Inclusion means everybody. And I know it in the 7 principles of UU. And I'm proud to tell you that I'm a member of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Topeka. I love going to UUs and sharing my story because I see the same thing. And in Little Rock, Arkansas, in Mankato, Minnesota, in Loveland, Colorado, in Indianapolis, where I went and spoke. And I've spoken in a lot of different UUs and a few other churches, but some UCCs, a Catholic church, a Lutheran church, and a couple of Baptist churches, and American Baptist. But and I see it everywhere I go. I know without doubt that y'all open your arms up to everybody. And you not just give them a place to be, but a place to belong. And when you do that, it changes their life. It changes the life. Everything that they can see and every breath that they take is what's changed. And it doesn't matter if it's transgender or if it's something else. If it's something that's happening in their life that is causing them to be in this place, and you wrap this unconditional love around them, it changes everything, every breath they will ever take and everything they will ever see. I just think it's marvelous to walk into a space like this and get to share my story. Y'all give me hope for the world that things are going to be okay, in spite of some of the things that are happening that might say contrary. Things are going to be okay, because as long as people gather in the spirit of community and come together with no exceptions and no conditions and love each other, we're going to end up being okay. Thank you for being a part of that, and thank you for letting me share.